he found employment with the Ryan Aircraft Company. Now, if the Ryan Aircraft Company sounds familiar to you, that's because what you see there is the assembly of the Spirit of St. Louis. So this would be the first airplane with transatlantic nonstop flight with Charles Lindbergh. So Douglas Corrigan was able to assist with the building of this, and this would have been, of course, back in like 1927. That's when all this occurred. In fact, when Charles Lindbergh, he was seeking different aircraft companies to build this specific airplane. Not many were willing to do that because it was there was a budget there. But this Ryan Aircraft Company, they embraced it. They took on the challenge. They accepted the budget that Charles Lindbergh had. And the day that Charles Lindbergh took off from this California aviation company to fly to New York, it was this Douglas Corrigan that removed the chocks from the wheels as Charles Lindbergh taxied out for his trip to New York. Now, this made quite an impression on the young man, so much so that he had an idea that he also wanted to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. Now, he didn't want to repeat the exact flight that Charles Lindbergh did, but rather his own path. And with an Irish background, what better thing to do than to fly from New York nonstop over the Atlantic to Ireland? Well, to do this, you needed to have special permission, and he was seeking that permission through the Civil Aviation Authority. In the meantime, he purchased his own airplane. It's a Curtiss Robin. And unlike the one that Charles Lindbergh had, this was not a purpose-built airplane. This was a fairly standard airplane. It didn't have the features, but he rebuilt it. He assembled long-range fuel tanks in there to have enough fuel to get across to make the trip. But it certainly wasn't the fine-tuned machine the Spirit of St. Louis was. And you have to imagine that this is actually quite a bit later. This is about 1938. Still, though, a full year before Pan Am commercially decided to start flying transatlantic. So this was completely, uncharted territory, as it were. Now, as he flew from California to New York, his expectation was when he arrived, he would have that authority. He would have the permission to make that trip, but it was denied. They didn't think it was safe for him to make the trip. So what could he do but to fly back to California? So early in the morning, he fuels the tank up, and it's a very foggy day. It's not a very good weather day. The wind is out of the east, and as you may know, you want to take off into the wind with the airplane. So he takes off from Brooklyn, New York, to the east. He keeps going east, and he keeps going east. And about 28 hours later, he ends up in Ireland. Now, his story was he got turned around. He got mixed up. And by the time he saw the water and realized he'd gone the wrong way, he was too far to turn back. So he had to continue on to Ireland. Now, it took him 28 hours to complete the trip. The airplane only does about 100 miles per hour. And you can imagine the authorities weren't that amused. And he did receive a slight rebuke from the aviation authorities. However, when he came back home, he received a ticker tape parade. And he even wrote a book that's titled, That's My Story. Now, given the title, you might get a little inkling here it wasn't such a mistake that he ended up where he did. And I like this. This was the New York Post. I thought this was fairly clever on their part on the front page. The headline is, Hail Wrong Way Corrigan. So if you've ever heard of Wrong Way Corrigan, that's some of his background. Now, the interesting thing to me about this story, when you think about Charles Lindbergh, Douglas Corrigan, all these early aviation pioneers, they made this trip using a compass. Today we enjoy global positioning systems. We have satellite connectivity. We can tell where we're at any point on Earth, at any time. I can put into that computer the GPS where I am right now. I say I want to go to that distance, and it'll tell me how long it's going to take to get there. You have that technology on your phone. You drive with maps on your phone probably regularly. So they had these very simple compasses. Sometimes we make this comparison between the Bible and our being our compass. But listen to this. You know, there's a difference between true north and magnetic north. True north is the geographical north, and this is the direction to the Earth's geographical North Pole. So if you were to look at a map and spread it out, it's a fixed point on the globe, does not change. Magnetic north, on the other hand, it's a direction that the compass needle points as it aligns with the Earth's magnetic field. The magnetic North Pole is a less stable location that shifts over time in response to the changes in the Earth's core. Magnetic north is currently about 400 kilometers south of the geographic North Pole, but it can move as far as 1,000 kilometers away from geographical or true north. That's over 600 miles. So in aviation, if we look at a map and there's true north and there's magnetic north, they sit about on top of each other. And if you live in Minnesota, there's what they call the magnetic declination of 0. They're lined up. So as in Minnesota, as you look north, magnetic north and true north are lined up. So there's no problem. You could fly your magnetic compass right to the North Pole. But for us, we live over here. So my compass is telling me to go to this point, but true north is over here. So here, the declination is about 7 degrees. So I have to add 7 degrees to my compass to get to true north. So in that sense, I would submit to you that our Bible is more like a map, because our Bible doesn't point to a point that's moving or shifting or changing. Our Bible is true, and it puts us in the right direction every time. Now, I was recently reading through the book of Acts, and I stumbled across, I've seen it before, but it didn't stand out, but I stumbled across a term. It's a 2-word phrase that I'm going to ask. I've got a couple of people here that are going to help us, and I want to see if you can pick up on it. There's 4 verses here, and while it's not a cardinal direction that we would think of as north and south, but it does seem to give us instruction in the direction. Sandra, I think you have the first one, Acts 9:2.
And asked letters from him to the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found any who were of the way, whether men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem.
Excellency.
But when some were hardened and did not believe, but spoke evil of the way before the multitude, he departed from them and withdrew the disciples, reasoning daily in the school of Tyrannus.
Okay, Larry, you have a couple of verses. This is Acts 22:4. Again, listen to that for that phrase that we're trying to pin down.
I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women.
Okay, and then 24, verse 22.
But when Felix heard these things, having more accurate knowledge of the way, he adjourned the proceedings and said, when Lysias the commander comes down, I will make a decision on your case.
Okay, I don't know if you caught it. So I'm going to pick it up here in chapter 19. And you can actually turn in your Bibles with me at this point, because we have a story that's going to go with us. It's Acts 19, we'll start in verse 21. It says, when these things were accomplished, Paul purposed in the Spirit, when he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia, to go to Jerusalem, saying, after I have been there, I must also see Rome. So he sent into Macedonia 2 of those who ministered to him, Timothy and Aristus. But he himself stayed in Asia for a time. And about that time, there arose a great commotion about what? The way. That's the phrase, the way. Now, if you have a King James version, it might say that way. And it's interesting, in the New King James, the word way, is it smaller case or is it uppercase? It's uppercase, isn't it? It seems to have some substance or meaning, something there that maybe we should pay attention to. But when it says the way, basically it's a name for the Christian message or the community. You know, Christians follow Jesus as the way. So this is that gospel that Paul is bringing to these people. Now, the title just above verse 21 in my Bible says, The Riot at Ephesus. So it's interesting that this way leads to disruption and riot. Why is that? Let's read on. It says in verse 24, For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Diana, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. He called them together with the workers of similar occupation and said, Men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. So if you want to cause riot and disruption that would be contrary to the truth, this is one way to do that. Affect the pocketbooks. They saw that if they followed the way, they would have to give up a lucrative occupation. Or at least not having the foresight to look through and say, well, what if we gave up this occupation, followed the way, and God would bless in a different way. Goes on to say, moreover, you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but all throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that they are not gods, which are made with hands. If I turn back my Bible to Exodus 20, some of you are familiar with that area. What is Exodus 20? It's the commandments, isn't it? And I look at the fourth verse, and it says, You shall not make for yourselves a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water underneath the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them. And that's exactly what we're seeing is taking place here with these carved, engraved images of this Diana. Now, does God give us that direction because He's a harsh, exacting, mean, unloving God? Not at all. The opposite, the exact opposite is the truth. He loves us so much that He doesn't want us to go off on a direction. And like how that like the magnetic north can wave and change from time to time, leads to confusion. He wants us to stay that course, understand the important aspects of our walk so that we're continuously growing closer to Him and with each other. Verse 27, so not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship. Now when they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. So the whole city was filled with what? That's what the enemy brings. Confusion. And rushed into the theater with one accord, having seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, Paul's travel companions. And when Paul wanted to go into the people, the disciples would not allow him. And some of the officials of Asia, who were his friends, sent to him pleading that he would not venture into the theater. Some, therefore, cried one thing, and some another, for the assembly was what? It was just getting worse. And get this, read with me this last part. It says, and most of them did not know why they had come together. You know, if you're protesting in an organized way and you're doing it peacefully, good things can come from that. But when you're in a situation where you don't even know why you're there, that's pretty bad. And I wish it didn't happen today. But we see it happening even today. It says here in 33, and they drew Alexander out of the multitude, and the Jews putting him forward, and Alexander motioned his hand and wanted to make his defense to the people. But when they found out that he was a Jew, all with one voice cried out, for how long? How long? Okay, this group, you can't get anybody to do anything today for 20 minutes. But for 2 hours, this group cried, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." Now this would be, getting into what I would say, mob rule. And how do you describe or define mob rule? You might say that, it's a group who's using brute force to get their way. You could say it's a group using intimidation. And we see, unfortunately, how that played out even in Jesus' life. Jesus was tried unfairly. He was tortured and beaten, and he was put on the cross. And there's an excerpt from Desire of Ages. It says, like the bellowing of wild beasts came the answer of the mob. Release unto us who? Barabbas. That's who the mob wanted released. Louder and louder swelled the cry, Barabbas, Barabbas. Thinking that the people had not understood his question, Pilate asked, will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews? But they cried out again, away with this man, and release unto us Barabbas. Pilate asked, what shall I do then with Jesus, which is called Christ? Again, the surging multitude roared like demons. Now, when you see that word demons, what is that? What is a demon? Yeah, devil, you said something, Tyler? Yeah. Right. We know that a third of those angels lost their spot. That's what Revelation tells us. They followed Lucifer, Satan, the devil. And it's no big thing for an angel to take on the form of a human. We see scripturally how God's angels appeared that way and give direction in certain different ways and different times. And those fallen angels can have that same impact. We need to be very cautious and faithful in understanding of the word. So it would be no problem for the demons to influence, for those fallen to influence that crowd. And you wonder if some of them didn't even know why they were there. They were truly confused. And their answer was, let him be crucified. Verse 35 of Acts 19. And when the city clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, men of Ephesus, what man is there who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is temple guardian of the great goddess Diana, and of the image which fell down from Zeus? Therefore, since these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rashly. Now, here's a person who isn't of the way, but it seems like he has, scruples and sense about him, knowing that if there is no law, then it's just going to be chaos. And if there is no law, everybody's in danger of being injured, falsely accused, and who knows where that could lead. So at least he has his sense about him. He goes on to say, "For you have brought these men here who are neither robbers of temples, nor blasphemers of your goddess. Therefore, if Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a case against anyone, the courts are open, and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you have any other inquiry to make, it shall be determined in the lawful assembly. For we are in danger of being called in question for today's uproar, there being no reason which we may give to account for this disorderly gathering." And when he had said these things, he dismissed the assembly. He quelled the crowd and brought back order. Now, in the notes here, it says, the charges against believers are dismissed and Christianity is exonerated. Now, in the last minute of our discussion, we wish we could say that was the outcome in every scenario when the believers shared the way with non-believers. But the sad truth is not all stories ended the way it did for these devoted Christians. Sometimes the ending was more like what Jesus experienced, and martyrs were made. And in that context, the way isn't a map to this world, but to the perfect forever home that has been promised. And we find that promise as we read our last scripture in John 14, 1 through 6. "Let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. And where I go, you know, and the way you know." Thomas said to him, "Lord, we do not know where you are going, and how can we know the way?" And Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." May we be faithful and trusting in the way. Closing hymn number 482.